This video is sponsored by Audible. That's right, they are back with the amazing deal from last week. Signing up in the link below will give you a free trial month and also a free audiobook. For any book, podcast, news, or comedy lover out there, you definitely do not want to miss out on this offer. Their library is constantly updating, so you will always have something new to pick from, and each month that you are a member, you will get a credit for any book in their collection of over 200,000. So, if you want to support the channel and claim your free book, be sure to check out that link after the video. With every year passing, we as a society seem to be on the move more and more. Well, maybe not this year, but with the exception of the burning trash can that is 2020, every year prior it has seemed that people's lives have become even more hectic. We have apps on our phones now where we can order prescriptions without having to wait in line and place them. We can order shoes and pay ahead, so we can just pick them up from the store in a matter of minutes. And we can order our chai low-fat whipped cream double ice shaken and stirred double frosting with a cherry on top latte coffee frappuccino macchiato with just a few taps. This is by no means nothing new either. As I said, it seems each year we continue getting more and more busy, and with that lifestyle we will do what we can when we can. And that includes stuffing our faces with something of sustenance and going about our way. With drive-thrus becoming the standard now for eating while driving, vending machines have been the go-to for eating on the run for many years. The ease of it is the biggest appeal too, as we all know. You pop $1 or $2 in, you get your drink or snack, and you're on your way. But have you ever wondered to yourself, as you're sinking your teeth into that month-old Snickers bar, if this was safe? Probably not. And nobody would blame you, as most of us aren't wired that way to be paranoid about everything. And this was true for the residents in several cities across Japan in the mid-80s. Unfortunately, for a select number of people, they would fall victim to a crime spree that remains unsolved to this day. Throughout the year 1985, 12 people would die and 35 would fall gravely ill to what appeared to be poisoned drinks from random vending machines. But why did this happen? And was any traction made in finding those responsible for these attacks? Join me and fellow creator Nick Crowley as we dive into the true story of the Paraquat murders. Japan is a country with a workforce being one of the largest in the world. Every day, millions and millions of men and women head to their jobs, much like everywhere else. And with this on-the-go lifestyle that many of the residents have, grabbing something to eat or drink during their commute is an everyday thing for many people. Japan is also a country where a large portion working in the cities commute by walking. We've all seen the time-lapse videos of giant intersections where hundreds of people cross it at the same time. It would come as no shock to learn that Japan is one of the leading countries in terms of vending machine profits. But the machines there are a tad different from what you would find in Western countries. You will find snacks and sodas, of course, but you will also find bread, coffee, eggs, cigarettes, whiskey, shirts, magazines, rice, dried squid, and numerous other things hidden behind that literal paywall. See what I did there? And as frequently used as these machines are, it came as a complete shock to the entire country when they became the source of tainted drinks left behind by an unknown person or persons. The story starts on April 30th, 1985, in Fukuyama, Hiroshima, when a truck driver stopped at a vending machine to pick up a bottle of Aronamin C. And to his surprise, he found a second bottle sitting on top of the machine, completely full at that. Thinking it was his lucky day, he grabbed it and went about his business. Little did he know, he just made the worst mistake of his life. Shortly after consuming the drink, he fell ill. He began vomiting profusely, and when it was tested, it showed traces of the poison Paraquat. His condition grew worse, and by May 2nd, he was dead. Paraquat is not something to mess around with. It is extremely poisonous, and the stuff is actually banned in over 30 countries. It's used to kill weeds and is also unfortunately a common substance used in suicides in many countries around the world, Japan being one of them. I am going to come back on this later though as to why spotting these poisonings were so difficult for the police. There was a large gap in time between the truck driver and the next casualty from the poisonings. The next victim wasn't until September of 1985 in Izumisano, Osaka, when a 52-year-old man stopped at a vending machine and picked up a bottle of Aronamin C, and found a second bottle of it in the dispensing slot. Again, thinking he was just lucky, he took both and met the same fate as the victim before. He died on September 14th, and traces of the poison were found in the half-empty bottle of the drink. The next victim was on September 12th. This time, a 22-year-old in Matsusaka went to get a bottle of real gold, and just like the previous victim, found an additional bottle in the dispensing slot, and same as before, thinking it was just his lucky day, he took both bottles and died on the 14th as well. Traces of the poison were again found in the bottle. A week later, on September 19th in Fukui, a 30-year-old man finds a soda bottle under a vending machine. He takes it and is rushed to the hospital hours later. He dies on the 22nd, and traces of the poison are found when his stomach is pumped and also in the bottle as well. On September 20th, in Miyazaki, in what seems to be a trend now, a 45-year-old man goes to a vending machine, finds bottles of real gold in the dispensing slot, takes them, drinks them, falls ill, and dies a few days later, and again, the poison is found in the bottles. 3 days later, on the 23rd of September, a 50-year-old man gets a soda and finds 2 bottles of Aronamin C in the dispensing slot. He takes them home, the next day he drinks one, and in a matter of hours he is in the hospital. While strong at first, he ultimately succumbs to the poison and dies on October 7th. On October 5th, much like the previous, a 37-year-old man takes a bottle of Aronamin C home as he considers it a freebie, and the next day is rushed to the hospital where he dies on the 21st. On October 15th, a 69-year-old man finds 2 bottles of Aronamin C in the dispensing slots and takes them home. He dies on November 13th. October 21st, the 28th, and November 7th had the same stories with the same outcomes. Random people finding bottles of the drink in or on top of the vending machines, and within days, they are all hospitalized, with death shortly following. The final victim, and the only female, occur on November 17th, when a 17-year-old girl purchases a cola, and sadly, dies a week later from the toxic poison. These would be the 12 victims of the Paraquat poisonings.
By now, 12 people had died, and 35 had just barely managed to survive, consuming these tainted drinks. Police in several cities were at a loss as to the number of victims in the past 2 months alone, with all of them dying the same way, with the same poison, and the same type of drink. The only solid lead that police had was that all of the victims were eventually linked to taking free drinks from vending machines that had been previously placed there. Yet that lead alone was seemingly a dead end, because you have to think that hundreds, if not thousands of people use a particular vending machine each day, so the odds of finding whoever was responsible for placing the poisoned drinks there was like finding a needle in a haystack. And with over 135,000 vending machines in the country, police knew there was no way they could monitor them all. And secondly, it was and still is very common in Japanese cultures to leave behind an unwanted drink for a stranger instead of simply throwing it away. So finding and drinking a full beverage on a vending machine that you didn't actually purchase wasn't an uncommon occurrence. In fact, in some areas, it was as frequent as holding the door open for someone when leaving a building. Police knew that they either had to catch this person or persons in the act, which as we know seemed like a Hail Mary at this point, or they could contact the actual companies who make these drinks in the hopes that they could add some type of security measure to prevent any more deaths via their products. One of the most common drinks that was spiked with this poison was Oranomen C, which ironically was a health drink, would be the first to be targeted by the police. At the time, in 1985, the bottles were twist tops which could easily be tampered with and then resealed without the average person noticing. I mean, it's not like these bottles were glowing green from this poison, and with the tops being twistable, it would be very difficult for anyone to tell that it had previously been opened. To combat this, the company behind the drink was given a number of ideas to make their products safer. Ideas including having the beverages require a bottle opener, or foregoing bottles altogether and redistributing them in cans that would have a pull tab, which would make them essentially tamper-proof. However, these ideas fell on deaf ears, and the company did nothing to fix this problem, with their reason being, well, the amount it would cost to reach this goal would be in the millions, and the deaths of 12 innocent people just didn't warrant that kind of expense. Surprised? Yeah, so were the police, finding a solution that could prevent more deaths, and getting told no simply because they didn't want to spend the money that they most definitely had, and could have easily spent. I mean, to them, that much money would simply be pocket change, but still, they saw it as an unnecessary expense. And with that, the police were left back at square one, and with virtually no leads. They had no option but to begin searching areas where known victims were, in the hopes of finding anything that could lead to some sort of outcome. Now, during this time, it was actually theorized that these attacks may have been directed towards the various companies whose drinks were poisoned, kind of like an extreme form of company defamation brought about by bitter competitors. Why risk your life to have their product when you can safely drink ours? And while I can see this theory holding some water, it also at the same time seems more in the realm of fiction than anything in the real world. Like, I get wanting to see your rival's business take a hit, but not at the cost of people losing their lives. And to this day, we're still without any real evidence that this was the case. Now, this was also around the time where talks of a copycat killer began to circulate. A few years prior, in 1982, in the United States, there was a string of poisonings that resulted in the deaths of 7 people. It was labeled as the Chicago Tylenol murders, and to this day it still remains unsolved. People in Japan, including the police, started to wonder if this was some sort of sick competition with what had happened in the US, with these recent attacks potentially being inspired by the Tylenol murders. And the reasoning behind this is sound as well, since in cases of poisoning, especially mass murder poisonings, it is extremely difficult to find the person or persons responsible for them. Having a person die via poisoning is tricky enough to detect with an autopsy, but finding the actual person who did it is a different story altogether, since most who are poisoned do not show any symptoms immediately. Some poisons literally take hours or even days after you're exposed to them to show any symptoms, let alone to kill, which creates an even bigger problem for police to find those responsible. The talks of these deaths were growing even more intense by early 1986, and that was around the time that companies who made soft drinks that were poisoned started to speak out in an attempt to cover their own asses, with their tone being anything but sympathetic. One unnamed company went on to actually blame the victims for being so careless and foolish for taking these drinks, as it goes against what everyone is taught as a child, to not take and consume something that looks suspicious. They argued that if a person came to a vending machine and saw a random drink sitting on top of it, then it would be wise to simply leave it there, instead of being greedy and taking it. And having grown up in a completely different culture, I can see the logic there, that you shouldn't take something consumable if you don't know where it came from. But it's another thing to call the victims foolish for this, given that this was such common practice there. I mean, it would be the same thing as finding a $5 bill on the ground, picking it up and taking it. I mean, if that money was covered in some type of flesh-eating bacteria or poison, and you end up dying from coming into contact with it, are you still foolish for picking up that money off the ground? And with the shaming of literally dead victims, the entire thing was clearly handled very poorly, something that many attribute as one of the reasons these murders were never solved. Well, that, and there was one other reason, that many chalk this up to suicide rather than homicide.
Earlier I mentioned that ingesting paraquat was a very common means of committing suicide in many countries around the world. This is very true, particularly in Japan, so much so that 93% of paraquat poisonings are related to suicide. The reasons for this are, one, because the substance at a time was so easily obtainable in drugstores. All you would need was identification, and the other being that it has an extremely high fatality rate when consumed. It really does not take a lot for the poison to be lethal. Less than 2 tablespoons is enough to kill a grown adult in a matter of hours. Less than that can still lead to death, but will be at a much slower pace, sometimes being weeks of agonizing pain before ultimately dying. Japan is also unfortunately known for having high suicide rates, and this is nothing new. The country has had a long history with it, dating all the way back to the 12th century, when it was seen as an honorable way of dying by many in military roles. During the 1980s, Japan was the second highest country with suicide rates, with 14 people out of 100,000 taking their own lives. This is important to talk about, because it is so heavily tied to these murders from the poison drinks in the vending machines. The fact that the country already had a well-known history with suicide, and the fact that paraquat was used in the deaths, was a massive sign to many across the country that this was nothing more than simply people committing suicide, and if it hadn't been for the victims telling medical staff about finding drinks outside of the vending machines, then it may have forever been labeled as simply a string of unfortunate suicides. To many people involved in the case, they do not see it as these people taking their own lives. They see it for what it ultimately is: murder, senseless and horrific murder that took the lives of 12 people who were simply trying to enjoy a beverage. Those responsible for these crimes probably knew that using paraquat as the poison was a smart move. They probably knew how heavily linked it was to suicide, and with the country's history, they probably assumed that many would take it for what it was and not investigate. And even if they did, it would be almost impossible to identify them. As much as I hate to say this, whoever was responsible was smart about this. I say this because of the reasons I just mentioned, but also because with the timeline of the deaths, with only one being in April, and with a handful of others who managed to survive scattered throughout the month, leading to 11 other deaths and 30 near deaths in the short time span of September to November. The very quiet period from April to September tells me that whoever was doing this was watching and planning, seeing how the first few poison bottles went and how deadly they were. With only one person dying in the first month and the others managing to survive, it probably told the person or persons responsible that they were not putting enough poison in the drinks. So I could see them laying low for a few months to let any sort of attention fade away, and during this time increasing the amount of poison in the drinks as well as watching the areas where select vending machines were. Perhaps they chose those areas due to an increased amount of traffic, or maybe it was to target a select person who would use those vending machines on their commute. There are honestly numerous ways to look into how whoever did this planned it. It could also simply just be that it was someone who wanted to harm people for no reason other than sick and twisted enjoyment. It would explain the randomness of the locations where the poison bottles were found. They were in fact in at least 6 different cities, so if they were doing this just to confuse police or had certain targets in mind is anyone's guess. The truly sad thing is that 12 people lost their lives for no reason at all, and hardly anything was even done as a countermeasure to prevent more deaths. The final death in November marked the end of the poisonings, and as quickly as they began, they abruptly stopped. The only known motive behind this madness is known only by those who poisoned the drinks, and it seems that it will stay that way. In the over 30 years since, no suspect or arrest has ever been made in the connection with this crime spree. And to add even more insult to injury, whoever was behind all of this, even if they came forward tomorrow and could prove without any doubt that they were the ones responsible for the poisonings, nothing legally could be done to them, as the statute of limitations expired in the year 2000. If you can take anything away from this, it would be to never trust anything suspicious. If it's a drink on top of a vending machine, a random lone piece of candy on a store shelf, or something appearing too good to be true, then it probably is. I want to give a big thank you to Nick for helping me with this video. Most of you here probably know his channel by now, and for good reason. He makes some of the most in-depth and engaging dark content on the entire platform, and I am incredibly thankful that he was able to help me out with this video with his busy schedule. I hope you all enjoyed this creepy true crime story. If you have your own theory on the story, let me know in the comments below. I only ask that everyone continue being respectful and awesome in the comments. You all know the deal by now. Lick that subscribe button and gently tap that like button, and I will see you all in the next one. Stay safe out there, friends. Good night.